So, hello YouTube, welcome back. Do give me a one in the chat to let me know that you have good audio, you can hear my voice, but thanks all for being here. Today is the kickoff of my long-awaited Luther series. Well, at least the slides specific to Luther. A few days ago, I did this talk, the linear connection from Luther to Hitler. So, Neil D says, the amount of cope Lloyd will create among prots with regard to Lutherville will only be rivaled by Muslim cope. Neil D, yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing because I've kind of noticed the same thing. I've had a few people tell me, Lloyd, you're lying, without specifying what I'm lying about. Now, people are just going to slander me or smear me and just call me a liar. I'm not going to entertain that. It's not good faith communication. They're not trying to present a cogent argument. So I'm not interested in yeah. Anyway, so yeah, welcome everyone. So Lilo Main, good to see you. Glad to have you. Artsy Fartsy, welcome. Athanasius, D Muleman, welcome. Dr. Obvious, Neil D, of course. Eating your lunch, interesting name. Owen Shelton, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you happen to be. Good morning, he says. Got my popcorn ready. So, yeah, everyone. So today, of course, we are discussing Martin Luther, and we're going to have a look at the aspects of Martin Luther that have, shall we say, been overlooked. Some of this is relatively new, I would say, in one sense, in that there's newer research that's been performed as we get new technologies. It's been easier to do this, whereas before a lot of this was hidden in academia or otherwise inaccessible. Now there's been more translations. I've got a full set of the Luther's works. And of course, I had one Protestant tell me that having the books means nothing because I don't have the feeling. You see, I don't have the internal feeling. I don't have the internal inspiration. So having the facts, actually having Luther's own words, Luther's own writings means nothing compared to that particular individual having the right internal experience, as he called it. So yeah, thanks. Glad you liked the thumbnail. So, oh, thanks for the blue wrench. You're welcome, Dr. Obvious. No, that's great. You earned it, I think. The Ann Alice. Hello, Lloyd. I love listening to your sessions. It often seems as though your sound is kind of low. Is there a way to increase the audio? Let me bring the mic closer. I don't know if that makes a difference. I think Catholic and also apologists to take off Lloyd and research Luther more. We're on the other prot side. Yes, and that's true. And today we're going to have a look at the. I'm going to try and do 25 slides today, not more. And yeah, you're in company with the Little Main. Yeah, so I'm very honored to have all of you support me. So thank you. Okay, yeah, I'll tell you what. Let's just dive in and let's just start annoying people. Apparently, that is what I do. Obviously, I don't make any friends by talking about these issues because I'm creating division apparently. So something that I want to bring your attention to, and I think this is probably sort of a quote that I hope will help to define what I do here on the channel. This is by Soviet dissident Yevgeny Yevtushenko, and he said, when the truth is replaced by silence, the silence is a lie. There has been a great deal of silence on this issue, and that silence is a lie. We need to discuss the truth. These are the facts. This is not a distortion. And this is, we're going to learn the things that Martin Luther himself said. Now, part of this is that I have seen too many Protestants, and of course I come from the Protestant church. I was an Anglican my entire life. Is that I saw too many Protestants, one, telling lies about the Catholic Church, and then telling lies to defend the Protestant religion and history, which is no different to what Muslims do. That for me caused alarm. That for me was very concerning. So I started digging. What I found is going to be, for many people, very unpleasant, and as I've seen already. But let's do the unpleasant work that needs to be done. The sin of omission. Yes, I mentioned that actually on the last show. I said those words, the sin of omission, that they're guilty of the sin of omission. So I need to bring up that quote later. This is Romans 13, 1 and 2. That will be relevant. But let's dive into Lucifer. So let's learn about Martinus Luther, the first Protestant. Actually, yeah, and of course I've compared him here with the picture of Adolf Hitler. My previous talk discussed his relationship to Adolf Hitler and their similarities, and there are sufficient of them to draw a line from one to the other. So, in one very real sense, historically, Hitler was simply fulfilling the written and express words of Martin Luther. He put into practice a plan that Luther had written but not executed. Things that Luther had said but not yet acted upon. Himself, at least, but was acted upon by followers of his, and are still being done today, based on the words and writings of Martin Luther. Was Martin Luther a heretic, Dan? Yes, I would say very much so. Was he a blasphemer? Oh yes, most definitely. Was he Christian? I'd say there's a question mark there. Yeah, I'd say he could probably tie his shoelaces. I'd say maybe he had that right, but beyond that, I'd question anything the man said. Welcome all around. Let's begin. So, did Martin Luther, just something that came at me that I had to... Let's start with the question of Martin Luther's death. It's actually a very interesting story. I'm not going to go into every detail of everything, because this is going to be a very long series. We're going to have a lot of these talks. There's so much to unpack here. But I want to introduce you to some of the facts. There's a lot of confusion around a lot of Martin Luther stuff. I want to start introducing to the works. I have a full set of Martin Luther's works, just so that everyone is aware of it. I have the entire set of Martin Luther's works, right? Which, with your help, I have paid for. I've bought. There was something like $380 to buy the full set of 58 books in English, which is not even the complete set of his works in German. But that's what we have, and we're going to be learning about all of that. Okay, and so I have the full set if anyone wants to, see if I'm actually getting things from Martin Luther's own mouth. Right. Did Martin Luther hang himself? There apparently is this claim, but it seems to be that the answer is no. Right, just like in the movie Relic, the beast started out as a human and then mutated into a beast. Okay, well, I hope the Vatican is watching this and someone removes his statue. Yes, I believe they should. Martin Luther, the influential German theologian and key figure in the Protestant Reformation, did not hang himself. His death occurred on February 18, 1546, at the age of 62 years. The reason for his passing is assumed to be a cardiac infarction, heart attack. Tigger says, eye-opening and shocking information. Years ago, I visited an ancestral village in Germany where I learned that some of my ancestors were among his original supporters. Later, gens became Nazis. Yeah, well, interesting story. I mean, it's amazing the connections people have and the things I learn in the chat and the comments. But yes, the Protestant church, I know there's the whole claim of Hitler's Pope and so on, but that is entirely false. That is entirely a myth, a narrative. However, we can factually and correctly state that the Protestant church was Hitler's church in Germany. The vast majority of Protestants were very much behind the Nazi party, voted for it, and numerous Protestant and Lutheran theologians corrupted the Bible and corrupted Christianity in service of the Nazi party, believing that the Nazis were the new Christians. Whereas you cannot make the same claim of the Catholics. So no, there's a lot of propaganda, but we'll discuss one issue at a time. I'm not going to go into every last word and every last book written on it, but I will point you at information that shows you that there's a completely different narrative. That evidence exists, and we cannot ignore the evidence, because once you see the evidence, it changes the picture completely. And thanks for subscribing, Elmin Foss. Welcome. Now, let's look at some of the stories around his death. Let's see if the stories even match up. For someone who's such a well-known figure, well, people can't seem to get the details of his death correct. An apoplectic stroke. Okay, I thought it was a heart attack. Fine, whatever. An apoplectic stroke deprived him of his speech, and he died shortly afterwards at 2:45 a.m. February 18, 1546, age 62 in Eisleben, the city of his birth. He was buried in the castle church in Wittenberg beneath the pulpit. So now he's died of a heart attack, and he died of a stroke. Okay. The probable cause of his death was a stroke of paralysis. Luther began to feel pains in his chest late in the afternoon of February 17. The probable cause of his death was a stroke of paralysis. I'm just using multiple sources. These are multiple different encyclopedias and other sources discussing it. The great reformer died of what we call natural causes. Okay? Natural causes. He just died natural causes. He started experiencing dizziness, ringing in his ears, and painful arthritis, which reminds us that Martin Luther was a very sickly man. He was not a well man. He was severely unwell, physically. There's historical evidence to suggest that Luther also had kidney stones and suffered from severe headaches. In 1537, he had written an account of a severe heart attack that almost ended his life. And this is a picture of Martin Luther after his death. He weighed 330 pounds, 150 kilograms. He was a large man who loved to drink. He would get drunk almost every night, apparently, or at least drink 2 liters of wine or beer every night and ate like a glutton. That's his another death mask. That's another view of Martin Luther's death mask. Another view of Luther's death mask. And, of course, that's Martin Luther. There are very popular depictions of him as a thin... Yes, syphilis is natural. Yes, we'll get to the whole syphilis part. We'll get there eventually. Syphilis is definitely natural. How did he get syphilis? You get syphilis from walking down the stairs, right? Or eating a banana, right? Now, Luther inspired the Nazis. Let's go to the World History Encyclopedia. Luther died of a stroke at age 62. Even among his admirers, Luther faced criticism as he was censured for his handling of a scandal involving Philip I of Hesse, who Luther advised to lie about his bigamy. So Martin Luther wedded this prince to another woman, so that the man had 2 wives. And I've discussed already on my channel, there's a talk on my channel about Martin Luther and his views on polygamy. Martin Luther said there was effectively nothing in the Bible that prevented a man from having multiple wives. That's, as you know, standard Christian doctrine, that the man can marry many, many wives. It's not Muslim at all. Nothing to do with Islam. That would never happen. Not with Martin Luther. No. So when this whole second marriage of this man was being uncovered, Martin Luther told the man to lie to everyone. And Philip said, look, I've already broken the law here. I've already embarrassed my name. I am not going to lie. So Martin Luther apparently told him, look, you do what you want. You tell the truth if you want and deal with the consequences of telling the truth. Me, I'm not going to admit to anything and I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be just fine. I'm going to walk away from this because my name is Martin Luther and I believe in men having polygamous marriages and lying, because that's apparently what Christians do. And especially if you found a new Christian religion, if you go back to the original Christian religion, you tell people to lie about the fact that you married them to 2 women. That's the Martin Luther way to do things. And also, Martin Luther was censured for his refusal to compromise with other Protestant leaders at Marburg. He was a very stubborn man. Luther also hated Jews and wrote about violence against them. He absolutely, positively hated Jews, like Hitler did. Now, everyone will go back to, well, when Martin Luther was 12, he didn't hate any Jews. In fact, there's no writings. Luther wrote nothing about Jews when he was 12. He was a lovely child. He wrote nothing about killing the Jews. Yes, he did that in his 50s and 60s. But so I don't know why we're talking about what he was doing when he was 12. Although modern scholars have offered various apologetics for this aspect of his character, it is impossible to explain away easily as Luther simply being a man of his time. Well, he was just a man of his time. Muhammad was just a man of his time. He married a 6-year-old because that was what you did in that time. And Muhammad was a man of his time. So you just hated Jews and called for their death because Martin Luther was a man of his time. You simply told people to lie about having multiple wives because that's being a man of your time, right? That's Christian. It's just the Christianity of the time. You lie, you marry multiple wives, and you try and get all the Jews killed. That was the Christianity of the day. And Martin Luther, being the expert Christian, knew what he was talking about. So his powerful rhetoric and skill as a writer continued to encourage anti-Semitism and hate crimes after his death. Luther's works, in fact, were greatly admired by the Nazi Party of Germany in the 1930s and early 40s, and were used as justification for genocide, and that is true. Now, did they misinterpret Martin Luther? No, they just quoted him accurately, exactly. In fact, they went a little past and beyond, and they added their own innovations on top of, but they certainly started on a base of accurate Martin Luther's own words. Welcome, Tom Gyokai. His stubborn streak was noted by his friend Melanchthon, and his attitude towards Jews seems symptomatic of this, as once he had decided upon anything, he was unlikely to be moved from that position. Also seen in his rejection of Copernicus' theory of the heliocentric universe. So, of course, I have discussed this as well, that both Luther and Calvin rejected the idea of the sun being at the center of our galaxy. They rejected that the Earth was at the center, and of course, the Catholic Church was apparently against science, and Luther was progressive, but no, Luther was the backwards fool in this case. I have that on my channel. Now, there is no evidence he ever interacted to any meaningful degree with any Jewish people. And it is most likely he developed his anti-Semitism the way many still do today, by never questioning what they hear about people they have never met. Of course, where did he get his Jewish ideas? Well, from the Gnostics, of course, who hated the Jews too. So we will discuss Luther's Gnosticism separately, and we will go into some depth on that as we have time. Welcome, Mike and Janice. Luther's death, the best historical account. So this is from Michael B. Lukens, Associate Professor of Religious Studies at St. Norbert College in Wisconsin. Right, that's the DOI number here, 10.1093/JTS/41.2.505. Luther's Death and the Secret Catholic Report. Now, this report seems to be one that does not have a particular political slant. It simply presents the facts. Right, that's according to what I believe is a Protestant professor, right, who says this newly discovered report at the time, fairly recent, is the one that seems the least biased and the most accurate to describe Luther's death. The comment has been made, of no event in history are more details known than of the death of Martin Luther. Sure. However, one tests out such a claim, it is certainly true that very few deaths have generated as many conflicting reports. Now, if it's well known how he died, why are there so many conflicting reports? Okay. It was a time when the nature of one's death was believed to be a reflection of the inner spiritual life and one's posture before God. It was a time when wild rumors and deliberate fabrications were readily and regularly given credence. It was a time as well when polemical aims had higher value than historical accuracy. Keep that in mind, right? Polemical aims had higher value than historical accuracy. So we're coming from a time when there was a massive propaganda war going on. Not that it stopped, but we want to look for historical accuracy. Now, the Secret Catholic Report provides a detailed account of Martin Luther's death, offering insights into the circumstances surrounding it. The report should be in my archive. Just check the links below, and of course you've got the name of it, so you can look it up easily. The apothecary, right, the pharmacist who treated Luther at the very end, authored this report, which was initially kept confidential before being anonymously revealed 2 years later. The report adds significant medical details not present in other accounts and sheds light on the actions taken during Luther's final hours, including attempts to revive him using medical treatments. It highlights the presence of an argument among physicians regarding the cause of death, with one attributing it to a stroke, the other to a form of suffocation. Additionally, the report mentions efforts made by the apothecary to administer expensive ointments and the eventual confirmation of Luther's death through rigor mortis. So, even though Luther was long dead, they refused to believe that he had died, and they wanted to continue to administer treatment because they could not believe that he had actually died. The apothecary also reports a substantial argument between the physicians over the cause of death, also missing in the official report out of Wittenberg. The one physician saw evidence of a stroke with slackness on one side of the face and discoloration. The other objected to this judgment not on medical grounds, but on the fact that this was inappropriate as an act of God upon such a holy and learned man. Yes, the cult of Luther, Neil D. There might be something to that, right? And he gave his opinion that death came from a form of suffocation. Maybe someone murdered him. So no, Luther did not hang himself. Okay, just so I can't find any good evidence that he hanged himself. Now, the apothecary or pharmacist. Finally, the apothecary by 4 or 4:30 a.m. So he died like Martin Luther had died like a couple of hours prior to that point. Was able to convince the attending group by clear evidence of rigor mortis that Luther was, in fact, dead. The apothecary's report indicated that after Luther's death, there were final, futile attempts to revive him between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. The medical treatments included administering a clistral injection in an attempt, a very expensive medicine, which only the wealthy could afford, in an attempt to stimulate and revivify Luther's life. Despite the apothecary's objection that it was too late to do so, the group present commanded him to proceed with the treatment. Nicolaus Paulus identified the apothecary as Johann Landau, a Catholic and the only apothecary known at the time to be in Eisleben. In fact, he was the only one in that region, in that area, so it had to be him. Note, his followers refused to accept that he had died. Now, this has a parallel in terms of Muhammad's death, where his followers refused to accept that he had died for some time. Right? So, yeah, I mean, make of that what you will. Let's talk about Egbert II van Heemskerk. This is Calvin and Luther in Hell. These are two paintings, one called Calvin in Hell, one called Luther in Hell. And this is Martin Luther arriving in hell on a skeletal creature. Okay, so now, again, if someone can tell me where this comes from, these quotes, I'm going to read this quote. I found it on the internet. You can still find it if you look, but I cannot find who said it. I don't have a final source for this. If anyone can find it, please let me know. Century Since, welcome. Yeah. So, now, the Reformation has brought no gifts. It has led millions of souls to hell. No gifts unless you call the uncrowning of our Lord Jesus Christ as King over society a gift. This Reformation created a religion of man and of self, out of which came Illuminism, Freemasonry, sexual libertinism, Marxism, globalism, and some radical secularism. Some gifts, Jorge, some gifts. Luther was a liar and a deceiver, and his work has long ago been. And then it cuts off. So I don't know what he said next. I don't know who said this. I have no idea of the context. If anyone knows where that came from, but anyway, let's continue. Please let me know, but let's continue. Permanent revolution. So the two paintings, Luther and Calvin entering hell, are being led to the gates of hell by a multitude of little demons, insects, and imaginary animals. Seated on moving carcasses, the two reformers seem to enjoy their ride as if they finally arrived at home. The two canvases were painted in England. They're both signed Egbert van Heemskerk, the name of two painters, father and son, active in England around the late 17th to early 18th century, whose work is difficult to distinguish. The artwork portrays a symbolic representation of these religious figures facing damnation. The painting captures the theological beliefs of the time with themes of redemption, predestination, and salvation. James Simpson is the Donald P. and Catherine B. Locher Research Professor of English at Harvard University. In his analysis of Calvinist Protestantism, he discusses the theological concepts surrounding Calvin and Luther's beliefs. He highlights the idea of God's arbitrary grace as the sole source of redemption. So yeah, God just randomly chooses who's going to be saved, and there's nothing you can do. There's absolutely nothing. It's basically a lottery. It's just pot luck, denying the possibility of salvation through good works. Simpson critiques Calvinist theology for its deterministic account of salvation, which he describes as cruel, despair-producing, and humanity belittling. So there's lots. I've discussed Calvin at length. You can go to my Calvin series. I've got two discussions on Calvin. They're 4 episodes so 2 shows in 2 parts, and we can discuss that. Okay, so this is a common view. This is a view of Luther and Calvin that is well known even within Calvinist and Lutheran circles. So liberalism, every man his own republic. I got that quote from someone in the comments, so thanks for that. Now, we already know, and I have discussed, and I will do this again, I will show it in the series. Martin Luther states that every man is his own church and his own pope. In other words, he makes up his own theology. He decides what the Bible means for himself, which means there is no truth, because everything is relative, everything is subjective. By the same token, every man is his own republic. Because, again, relativism, subjectivism. So, liberalism. And the question is, does liberalism have its roots in the illiberal upheavals of the English Reformation? And here's Calvin going to hell. Calvin's riding on a skeletal creature. To understand liberalism, we need to understand early modern Calvinism. This is the central claim made by Professor James Simpson in the book Permanent Revolution, The Reformation and the Illiberal Roots of Liberalism. As its jacket proclaims, Simpson means to rewrite the history of liberalism by uncovering its unexpected debt to evangelical religion. He aims to show how the English Reformation, so authoritarian in its beginnings, culminated in the proto-liberal Glorious Revolution settlement and led to the English Enlightenment. Now, I have mentioned, and I will discuss, how the Enlightenment was really a rebirth of Freemasonry and occultism, and we'll be going on with that. So, Lloyd, is it possible, according to your research, that the reason why Luther did not believe in the salvific aspect of good works is because Luther failed at good works? Yes, I'd say there's a fairly good reason to suspect that. Because he felt he was such a dirty sinner that there was no way that he had no discipline. He also lacked the discipline to actually do anything, to actually follow anything grounded as works. And therefore he said, well, you know what? Let's just believe in Jesus and we're good. Lazy, winning. That's pretty much how you can sum it up. But yeah, Herbert Butterfield's observation in the Whig Interpretation of History in 1931, that religious liberty was not the natural product of Protestantism, but emerged painfully and grudgingly. So what we should be getting from this is that Protestantism was a political movement that was largely totalitarian. It was utter subservience to the state. Understand that. That's what they're trying to say here in this long-winded way. Out of the tragedy of the post-Reformation world, following Butterfield's lead, Simpson argues that the liberal tradition is the younger sibling of evangelical tradition, but that it derives from Protestantism by repudiating it. So it's a revolution against Protestantism, because of Protestantism's, shall we say, negative aspects that they wanted to get away from. Early Protestantism, he asserts, was so punishingly violent, so vociferous and unsustainable, that it led to its adherents to invent a political doctrine to stabilize culture after 150 years of psychic and social violence. So let me see. We have the evil, satanic, pagan Catholic Church with the evil, satanic, pagan Pope, who are bad, and we Protestants, we're going to fix it. Luther, I'm going to sort this out. I'm going to fix it. We're going to do better, Senator. So Luther comes along, fixes the problem, and makes it worse. Because Luther for the win. So Protestantism was so punishingly violent, so vociferous and unsustainable that it led others to invent a political doctrine to restabilize the culture after 150 years of psychic and social violence. So we're going to have a quick look at just what was so violent about Protestantism that it supposedly was so necessary. But okay, whatever. Historian G.P. Gooch, in his 1898 The History of English Democrat Ideas in the 17th Century, and by the quasi-Marxist philosopher and social theorist Lasky in his 36 Rise of European Liberalism, both of them argued that liberal ideas were an unintended consequence of the Reformation. So liberalism, which today, liberal, which means the crazy left, okay? Liberalism, but fine, today they're the crazy left, came out of the Reformation, and are thus anathema to its makers. More recently, Berkeley historian Ethan Shagan has maintained that Protestantism was an authoritarian project, not a liberal one, and that the Enlightenment was a reaction against the habits of mind that the Reformation had generated. So, yeah. Okay, so now we've got an authoritarian Reformation, a political movement. Now, Albert Einstein said to us, unthinking respect for authority is the greatest enemy of truth, in a letter that he writes in 1901. Now, we have unfortunately been, in many cases, to a large degree, up until recently, respecting authority without thinking. But of course, I think COVID woke a lot of us up to the fact that we cannot necessarily trust the government, right? But we also need to look at our historical authorities, our academic authorities, and also our religious authorities. We might want to question them hard in this case. Now, for instance, we've got Mark Edwards, who writes some brilliant stuff. He wrote this, Printing, Propaganda, and Martin Luther. Understand, Martin Luther was a brilliant propagandist, and his followers were brilliant propagandists, and also they were vicious propagandists. Now, let's have a look at William Ralph Inge. He was I think, the head of the Anglican Church. So that's in England. So I did read out that some historians said that Luther did have a hard time with that, but it was because he was believing he was working himself to heaven, then invented a new definition. Yeah, well, okay, let's focus on the facts here. Let's not talk about speculation. Let's just deal with what we've got here. So, in Time magazine, November 6th, 1944, religion. Luther is to blame. William Ralph Inge, now 84 and 10 years retired as Dean of London St. Paul's, rarely breaks into public print nowadays. But when he does, the gloomy dean is as pungent and provocative as ever. He wrote, if we want to find the scapegoat on whose shoulders we may lay the miseries which Germany has brought upon the world, I am more and more convinced that the worst evil genius of that country is not Hitler, or Bismarck, or Frederick the Great, but Martin Luther. This is a Protestant. This is the head of the Church of England, I believe. Lutheranism is essentially German. It worships a God who is neither just nor merciful. Now, why would he say that? The law of nature, which ought to be the court of appeal against unjust authority, is identified with the existing order of society, to which absolute obedience is due. What that means is an authoritarian political system. Does that sound a little bit like Islam? Anyone? So this is kind of like Islam with German characteristics, maybe, with a bit of a Christian overtone. We must hope that the next swing of the pendulum will put an end to Luther's influence in Germany. So why do we have so many of these authors? And there's plenty more to choose from if you go and look for it. Tell us that Luther's God and Luther's religion and the effect of Luther was totalitarian and political system. That does start to sound to me like Islam. So, like the Sharia. Okay, now, so let's continue. Now, this is from the talk that I gave the other day. The link is in the description of the chat, the direct line of the linear connection from Luther to Hitler. And thank you, Century Sense, for the donation. Much appreciated. Very, very kind of you. Thank you. Right, so Luther called the princes the greatest fools and the worst scoundrels on earth. The people cannot, will not, any longer endure your tyranny and your presumption, because they were impoverishing and oppressing the peasants. With this encouragement and united front from the peasants, a revolt ensued in 1525. However, Martin Luther refused to officially stand as the peasants' leader, asserting that it was not his place as a minister to take the sword, and he instead sided with the princes. So he incites a riot by calling out the princes. The peasants take this as his endorsement. They try to fight whatever. I mean, whatever the details are, but they rise up in revolt against their circumstances, and then Luther abandons them and sides with the political authorities of the day. Luther wrote Against the Murderous and Thieving Hordes of Peasants. So that's a book that Luther wrote. Against the murderous and thieving hordes of peasants, of which the most infamous line read, Therefore, let everyone who can smite, slay, and stab. So smite, kill, and stab, secretly or openly, remembering that nothing can be more poisonous, hurtful, or devilish than a rebel, or in this case, a peasant who's rising up against the princes because they're starving. Can't have that now, can we? To Luther, if a peasant was willing to rebel, then he was outside the law of God, and he deserved what was coming to him. When it was over, 100,000 peasants were killed, and Luther was labeled as a traitor by the peasants. Man of God, true man of God. Awesome, Luther for the win. Let's continue. Now, this is directly from Luther's works. If you don't believe me, this is Luther's works. I have all 58 volumes. We can bring that up if you really need me to. But this is taken from Luther's works from this reference here. Okay, this is Luther's works, volume 46. Okay, and page 54. Against the robbing and murdering hordes of peasants. This is not the Pope, by the way. This is Martin Luther, because Martin Luther is the good guy. Therefore, dear lords, here is a place where you can release, rescue, help. Have mercy on these poor people. Let whoever can stab, smite, slay. And if you die in doing it, good for you. So in other words, stab the peasants, smite the peasants, slay the peasants. And if you die while killing the peasants, good for you. If you die in jihad, Allah will reward you. A more blessed death can never be yours, for you die while obeying the divine word, because God said in the Bible, kill the peasants, smite, stab, and slay the peasants, because if the peasants revolt against oppression, they need to be murdered, and you will go to heaven for murdering peasants. Am I interpreting the Bible correctly here? Is this me reading this correctly? Am I missing something? Help out, please. So, you die while obeying the divine word and commandments in Romans 13, 1-2. So Paul was writing in Romans 13, 1 and 2, kill the peasants, kill those peasants. That's how that's commonly interpreted. I'm pretty sure that. And you will die in loving service of your neighbor who you are rescuing from the bonds of hell. So when you murder the peasant, and you're either rescuing the peasant from the bonds of hell, or you are rescuing the people around you from peasants, because the peasants are hell, and you're saving people from hell by killing peasants. So Martin Luther for the win. So of course this is where I'm going to start hearing about, well, it's like, Martin Luther didn't have to be correct in everything to be a good Christian. He had to only be correct about sola fide, and it doesn't matter if he was murderous and called for genocide, because that's okay, because it's only sola fide we're considering, and we don't have to think about because Muhammad was a good man and he said to love your mother, and it doesn't matter if he told everyone to murder Christians and Jews. It's okay, because we're talking about, F off. So now let's have a quick look at what it actually says in the Bible. Sorry, I've had people say that to me, or on that theme. Protestants tell me on that theme that no, Martin Luther could literally, actually someone literally wrote, Martin Luther could eat babies in public, and he would still be better than the Pope, and he would still be theologically correct. Okay, that would, so that's a weak hadith. Yes, I've actually had Protestants say that to me. because that's how you defend Muhammad. Okay, so now this is Romans 13:1 and 2. Be subject to government. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance or the law of God. And they that shall resist shall receive to themselves damnation. So Paul is writing here, if the peasants revolt against the government, murder the lot of them, stab them, smite them, secretly or openly, right? Let's have a look. Let's have another look. Let's go to the Catholic Church. Let's see how the magisterium interprets Romans 13:1 and 2. If they have the same view as Luther, because the Catholic Church is bad. Remember that. Catholic Church is evil. Luther is good. Okay, and 100,000 peasants later, he's even gooder because he saved you from hell, right? So the Church interprets Romans 13:1 to 2 as emphasizing the importance of obedience to higher powers as ordained by God. So higher powers that are ordained by God should be followed. The passage highlights that resisting a legitimate authority is akin to resisting God's ordinance, leading to damnation. However, the Church teaches that if civil authorities demand actions contrary to moral order, fundamental rights, or to the gospel, individuals are justified in not obeying. Now, sadly, the Catholic Church here does not say kill people, stab them, slay them secretly or openly, and if you die, you go to heaven because jihad is good for you. Catholic Church doesn't say that, so clearly they're doing Christianity wrong, because that's why we got Martin Luther to teach us that you should smite and slay and stab. He was infallible. Luther did believe he was infallible. Luther literally stated he was a prophet. He was speaking directly from the word of Jesus. He was speaking from the mouth of Jesus. That was Luther's position. And anyone who disobeyed him was satanic, was wrong. Understand? So yeah, this is Martin Luther. This is the great Martin Luther, supposedly. But okay, fine. Hopefully I've made my point. Let's move on. A dark hidden legacy. Now, this is from Rutledge, the European Legacy. This is DOI number 10.1080/108/487.2024-2301875, whatever. Look it up. Martin Luther, The Dark Side. Living, I Was Your Plague. Martin Luther's World and Legacy by Lyndall Roper. Very famous historian, very good historian. Wrote a lot of work on Martin Luther. Very well respected. Let's have a look. The book opens, so this is a review of the book. Luther's greatest adversary was the Lord himself. I don't know what Luther was thinking. Look, I'm just presenting the info. There's more to be discovered. If you're willing to look at these books, if you're willing to look at these things and read them further, you will discover there's a lot of evidence on Martin Luther. I can't read every book. I'm not going to sit here reading you a 400-page history book. I'm going to touch on numerous different points to tell you that evidence exists for all of this. There's overwhelming evidence. This is not just me taking one quote out of context, two quotes out of context. There's a raft of material on Martin Luther being a depraved, sick, violent, disgusting, blasphemous, Gnostic asswipe, to put it mildly. So, the book opens with a meticulous examination of how Luther's witty, often coarse, polemical assaults, coarse, remember this, and they're trying to write nicely about him, okay? Remember, these are historians trying to write nicely about Luther. Martin Luther stated, Office of the Man, Martin Luther bluntly, openly stated he was a prophet. So he was greater than the Pope. He was a prophet. I have covered this. If you look at my series on Aquinas and logic, I discussed that. I discussed Martin Luther and his claims to being a prophet, the prophet of Germany. He viewed himself as a prophet, and he was viewed by his followers in Germany as a prophet. So he claimed to be speaking the whole truth and nothing but the truth. He claimed to be speaking directly from Jesus, inspired, and he spoke directly exactly what Jesus wanted. And so, that was Martin Luther. So anyhow, often coarse polemical assaults were an effective modus operandi, enabling him to cement his own position by infringing on the rights of others to speak. In other words, he shouted others down. He was censorious, which is free speech is bad for you, of course, if you're. It also made dialogue and compromise with the Catholics or with the Sacramentarians all but impossible. So he refused to budge. He was right and you were wrong, and that was it. But of course, we're seeing how right it is, because murder people, that's the Christian thing to do. God said so in Romans 13, murder the peasants, kill them all. And then his aggressive strategy in dealing, okay, so he was highly aggressive. And he had a distinct persona, at once coarse and also witty, and the epitome of masculine posturing and irreverent defiance of papal authority, except, of course, he loved his own authority. And he had an anarchic attractiveness, and he was sort of a bit of an anarchist, okay? Anarchist, yeah, because that's what we need, anarchy. We need anarchists, because, yeah. Now, moving on. Let's look at Machiavelli and the Protestant Jihad. This is in the Journal of Political and Military Sociology. The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Violence. Yeah, so let's have a look. At noon on October 31, 1517, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the main door of the castle church in Wittenberg. Now, that story seems to have occurred, and that story seems to have been invented 30 years after Martin Luther died by Melanchthon. Now, he probably just posted it somewhere, left it somewhere, gave it to someone, but the whole idea of him posting it, knocking it with a nail into that story was made up. Okay, that's a legend that started 30 years after his death, as they built this whole story around him. In 1520, Niccolo Machiavelli published L'Arte della Guerra, in which he announced the scientific laws of military power and success. Within a century, a religious and military revolution swept over Europe, destroying together the last vestiges of armed chivalry and the unified Catholic worldview upon which it rested. Without denying the existence of other variables, this paper examines 3 ways in which Reformation Protestantism influenced the development of modern warfare. So modern warfare looks like, the popes, the Catholic Church wanted to kill everyone and they just made war. No. It looks like Martin Luther had a lot to do with that. And the Protestants were like, we need to make war on people. We need to make jihad. So yeah, the greatest Reformation memory is a legend. Yes, Neil D. It looks to be a legend. It looks to be a myth that was made up 30 years after he died. He probably left it at the brothel. Yes, he might well have done so. So moving on. 1. By maintaining that the natural world was utterly profane because man is depraved, the depravity of man. Isn't that the Gnostic position? That the world of matter is profane, man is profane, and only spirit is good. Only sola fide, faith only. Yeah, hold on, that sounds very Gnostic to me. That the natural world is utterly profane, the utter depravity of man, no works in this dirty, slimy, ugly, disgusting, sinful world can help you. That's a very positive Christian view, as you can tell. God made the earth and the earth was good, but not to Martin Luther or John Calvin, because the earth is disgusting, profane, and evil, and sick, and twisted, and evil, and you're evil, and everything you do is evil, and you can only do evil, your mind is evil, your thoughts are evil. That's what John Calvin wrote. I've discussed this at length on my channel already. That's the view of John Calvin, that's the view of Martin Luther. John Calvin was influenced heavily by Martin Luther. Right, the world is utterly profane. Protestantism legitimized the pursuit of warfare in a scientific way. Scientific warfare, welcome to Darwinism and atheism. 2. The major Protestant generals, Maurice, Adolphus, and Oliver Cromwell, were remarkably adept at employing new technology to augment the fighting capacity of their armies. Because Protestantism is a religion of peace, because the Catholics are so violent. Don't forget that. That's very important. That's very important. And Protestant mysticism, now that's odd. They had mystic Protestants, and I've discussed them just recently. I discussed them in my discussion, Pius X and Modernism, and these mystic Protestants were off their meds, to put it politely. The Protestant mystics were all heretical, crazy, and off their meds. None of them were what you would call Orthodox Christian. Orthodox with a small o. Protestant mysticism was characterized by a divine hatred. We have to hate. Yes, the religion of hate, that's Islam, was characterized by a divine hatred of the ungodly that resulted in a deadly martial enthusiasm. Okay, we hate anyone that's not one of us, that's not Muslim, Protestant, and we have to go and make war on them. Make jihad on them. So yeah, because it's the religion of peace. That's from James A. Aho and Jim Aho, Journal of Political and Military Sociology. You can read that yourself. It's on the screen. Let's move on. Now, Martin Luther says here, they quote in this journal, war and killing, along with all the things that accompany wartime and martial law, have been instituted by God. So Allah has ordained jihad upon the non-believers. Okay? War and killing is instituted by God, because that's what the New Testament teaches. Jesus came and said, killing and war and slaughtering the peasants is ordained by God. The hand that wields the sword and kills with it is not man's hand, but God's. So if you murder the peasants, it's not your hand that's doing the killing, it's God's hand that's doing, because God loves to kill, because yeah, that's what God does. It is not a man, but God who hangs, who tortures, who beheads, who kills and fights. So God kills, God hangs people to death, God tortures people to death, God beheads, God kills, God fights, because Martin Luther said so. So yeah, thanks Martin. Okay, so yeah, I what can I say? Now, I've had many Protestants say, Lloyd, you're a liar. To whom I say, go F yourselves, because you have no idea what you're talking about. Bring some evidence, love to see it. So, now, of course, yeah, maybe, Muslims rely on Muhammad, right? And Muhammad clearly was not a good man. Now, Protestantism rests on Martin Luther and the claims Martin Luther made. And I'm starting to feel that Martin Luther was not a good man. So yeah, let's move on. I don't know how this is impacting you. Protestant jihad. Exactly. One of my favorite quotes, I use Puritanism, that horrifying feeling that someone somewhere is having a good time. Yeah. Only Love says, what was the difference between the ancient Gnostics to Luther's theology? Let's just say there's a little bit too much overlap between the Gnostics and Martin Luther. But we shall be discussing all of that as we go. I thought that men were supposed to be sinful, and that is why Jesus came, because we couldn't save ourselves. So yeah, well, okay. Luther did claim, yes, to be the mouthpiece of God. Sounds like someone else who totally has nothing to do with Islam. Yes, Pedro, that sounds like it has nothing to do with Islam. Let's continue. Scholars have recognized that without question, the century from 1560 to 1660 was a watershed period in military history, because the Protestants made things better by improving warfare, by bringing you more war, more death, and more killing, because Protestantism for the win. Sorokin estimates that casualties in the 17th century increased more than 100% of what they appear to have been in the previous 100 years. During the 30 Years' War, Germany's population alone was reduced anywhere from, using conservative estimates, 2/3, okay, 2/3 of its original size of 16 million to a quarter. So Germany lost, conservatively, up to a quarter of its population, because Martin Luther brought peace, prosperity, and the original Christian religion to Germany, because Martin for the win. By the time of the Treaty of Westphalia, German farmland had been ravaged, its schools closed for lack of teachers, more than half of its houses destroyed, and its capacity for economic development delayed perhaps a generation. Thanks, Luther. We couldn't have done this without you. We couldn't have done it without you. Luther did have the Quran. Luther did read the Quran. So just so you know, he has knowledge of it. So yeah. So let's see. One can find this. How do you have it? How do I find this info? I've I search very hard for information, and I subscribe to things as I need to. I look for things. I buy them as I need to. But I have software. So I have software that indexes a lot of data. I index something like 30, 40, 50, I don't know, 60 gigabytes of data, thousands of documents. And I have software that indexes the stuff. I can find keywords, but also when I see things mentioned, even vaguely, I'll kind of pick up an idea that I see. So when I start looking, it takes a lot of time. I have to drill down. I have to research. I have to go down. And when I see something like, that's odd, that's weird, why is that there? And then I start looking for papers. Yeah, it's a little bit like Islamic theology, isn't it? Just a little bit odd, right? So we will say a little more about these. Okay, let's go on. The popular acceptance. So what we had here was, okay, so under Protestantism, you had the popular acceptance of a desacralized military ethic. In other words, instead of a holy war from a Christian perspective, of a war that is given sanction because that war is necessary. And the Christians have thought about it very hard. They've thought, do we need to do this? I mean, this is violence and killing, but is there a moral reason for it? That went away under Protestantism, and you now removed the idea of a sacred war from the military ethic. Now it's just, well, kill them for political reasons, because Protestantism, well, it's political, isn't it? So, to say it another way, as accurate as these theories are, neither explicitly takes into consideration the cultural, or more correctly, the quote-unquote spiritual dimension of the military revolution that took place in Protestantism. The spiritual dimension of the Protestant military revolution. The state, the law, and military force that were most directly influenced by Protestantism. So yeah, Protestantism is going to make you more holy. It's going to make you more Christian-y. It's going to take you back to the original Christian-y. And it's also going to make you subject to a state that is totalitarian. It's going to place you under the yoke of the law, and it's going to increase military force upon you, because that's what Christianity does. It makes warfare more effective and it kills more people. Luther for the win. And then they speak of here, it will be impossible in a few pages to exhaustively describe the relationship between Protestantism and military violence. But what they're saying is there is an exhaustive body of evidence of the link between Protestantism and military violence, because Protestants are the good guys. Or maybe Protestants should start asking, are we the baddies, Hans? Are we the baddies? Because, yeah, maybe. So anyway, there are 3 facts, okay? We want to correct there are 3 facts about the late Reformation Protestant Krieg ethic, or war ethic, that several of his practitioners that may provide a starting point for future research. 1, the military ethics of Lutheranism. Hold on, I didn't realize... Hold on, Lutheranism has a military ethic. Lutheranism... So hold on, Lutheran Christianity has a military component. What are we talking about here? Oh, hold on, they mentioned Calvinism and baptism that legitimized the pursuit of warfare in a rational, scientific way. Oh, it's scientific warfare. It's scientific Lutheran warfare. So don't worry about it. We solved that problem. It's scientific warfare. We're killing you for scientific reasons because we're Lutherans and Calvinists and Baptists, because that's what good Calvinists do. We kill you scientifically. We don't want to do it unscientifically. For science. Yeah. So there you go. So this is why aren't we discussing this? I didn't learn this in Sunday school. I can tell you that. Did not learn this in Sunday school, and And then they speak of the Protestant generals had a remarkable capacity to adapt new technology for the sake of military victory. Jihad for the win. The Protestant jihad for the win. Scientific killing for the win. Thanks, Protestantism. Yeah. So let's continue. Mysticism and violence. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever heard Voddie Baucham, this black Calvinist, doing a talk about babies, and he calls babies a viper in a diaper. Now, he's not doing it as a joke. What he's saying is that baby is actually a condemned soul, an evil, dark soul, because God might have rejected them already before they were born as going to hell. They've been predestined, right, to go to hell. And now let's have a look at why he makes this claim that babies are not innocent, that babies are guilty, which is a very dark view to take of babies. But let's have a look. And this chapter in the book is of Protestant mysticism and violence. Now, most people don't connect mysticism and violence, but when you put the word Protestant in the mix, then you get mysticism plus violence equal Protestant mysticism plus violence. Because don't forget, Protestantism is the religion of peace. Keep telling yourself that. Protestantism in general, and the protests of Luther, Karlstadt, Munzer, and others, and all the other reformers had their origin in mysticism. Not even Calvinism. Oh, so hold on. Protestantism comes out of mysticism, and we've discussed mysticism because that led to modernism, which was a heresy, an outright heresy, a flaming heresy. Discussed it in my previous episodes. Look at the last 3 episodes I've done. Okay. Not even Calvinism, for all its puritanical legalism, failed to be deeply affected by the mystical spirit. By quote-unquote Christian mysticism, we are referring to the direct inward experience of being justified. Well, we murdered 100,000 peasants because we felt justified. We could feel it. We don't need history. We don't need the church. We don't need tradition. We don't need the church fathers. We don't need any sort of previous, rulings on the Bible and understandings of the Bible. We had a feeling, a mystical feeling that those farmers, those little peasants need to die because we were justified. We were justified, you see, because the Holy Spirit, that kind of mysticism, the one that kills hundreds of thousands of people. So the experience with all its fathomless ecstasy of being saved. So it's the direct inward experience of being justified in God, the inward experience with all its fathomless ecstasy of being saved. So inward experience, right? So that's inward experience. So that's called subjectivism. It's called relativism. It is not the truth. It is my fifis. That's the left. Now we're dealing with leftism again, insane levels of murderous leftism. The Reformation had its beginnings in a reaction of charismatic individuals to the rituals of the medieval church. So these guys were not, see, because the Catholic Church was evil. So these Protestant mystics reacted against the evil of the Catholic Church by starting a revolutionary warfare-based Protestantism, mystical Protestantism that got a lot of people murdered as a political movement because the Catholic Church was bad. So they went out and killed people because they're better than the Catholic Church. And so they considered the medieval Catholic Church spiritually stultifying. You know, it's like, oh my God, the Catholic Church is stultifying. I can't go out and kill people. I want to murder some peasants secretly and openly. I want to slash and stab and smite. But the Catholic Church won't let me. So you know what? I'm gonna, oh my God, Jesus is talking to me. Oh, good grief. I'm getting direct, oh my God, you know, I can feel the indwelling of the Spirit. Jesus just spoke to me and said, you know, you are now no longer stultified. You've read the Bible, you know the Bible, you're in fire with the Spirit. Go and murder some peasants, because that's what you do. Let's move on. In this article, we wish to examine what influence Protestant mysticism had on the contemporary military ethic. Oh yeah, because Protestant killing, it's very important. Warfare, so jihad. The legitimizing impetus Protestantism gave to the secularization of politics and war. Oh yeah, it looks like there's more and more evidence of that Protestantism was a secular movement heavily involved in politics and war. Doesn't that sound like a guy called Muhammad who had his jihad and his Sharia? Are we starting to see little parallels here? Are we starting to see that maybe the history that we've been given and what we've been told up until now is not... Yeah. Protestantism, the way I'm reading this, the way that I'm reading all of this, and there's a lot more to go, we have a lot of slides to go, is that Protestantism has a Muhammad problem. Just like Islam has a Muhammad problem, we have a Muhammad Luther problem in Protestantism. Only question I have about the viper babies is, aren't babies supposed to have baptism because otherwise they have the original sin and they go to purgatory? Well, that's something you need to ask your Catholic priests about. You need to check with the magisterium. In fact, don't ask your Catholic priest, because to annoy and offend Catholics, I have too many Catholics who think that Catholic doctrine is my favorite priest says. I don't care what your favorite priest says. That is not even relevant sometimes. What does the magisterium say? What is in your catechism? What is ultimately endorsed by the magisterium? If your favorite priest goes against the magisterium, he's wrong. Simple. That's the standard Catholic view. And you are outside of the Catholic Church if you don't obey the magisterium. So it's that simple. You need to check with the magisterium on that point. But now's not the time for me to do that, because that would take us off topic. Right? Martian also had similar views about babies, that they were disgusting and lumps festering for 9 months. Yeah, very strange and evil. It's very Gnostic, of course. That's the Gnostic view, because Martian was a Gnostic, as in many cases, in many ways, were Calvin and Luther. Christian became an ex-Protestant because Martin Luther. Exactly. Why does Muhammad have ham? Yeah. So, okay, let's move on now. So they speak here of zealousness, the enthusiasm, literally, the God-filledness with which it colored the practices of war. So let's have a look. So, okay, so then now we need to, so you're talking about the zealousness, the enthusiasm, the God-filledness with which Protestantism colored the practice of war. Oh my, that doesn't sound very Protestant. I thought the Catholics were evil and the Protestants were the good guys who fixed Christianity. So the mysticism of Luther was violent in tone. The mysticism of Luther, Münzer, Hans Hut, and John Saltmarsh was violent in tone. It screamed its outrage at the injustices and the pathos of the human condition. For when the perfect is known, one despises what is imperfect. So what happened is Martin Luther claimed to have discovered the perfect theology, and therefore he despised the imperfect. He didn't love his neighbor. His idea was, I need to go and kill those neighbors because they're not perfect like me, Martin Luther, and my guys who were perfect. So yeah, that's basically called reading the Bible and making up theology for yourself. Have I read Dr. Shenlunki's work on Luther? No, someone has mentioned that name and I couldn't find anything on this, but no, I don't. Let's not talk about Dr. Shenlunki right now. Per Catholic couple. So Neil D, I have no idea what you're talking about. So Neil D, just drop the topic of 7 years of age. That's not relevant right now. Can we stick to the facts? Unless you'd like me to just pull up the standard narrative on Martin Luther. Martin Luther was born on Tuesday, the 4th of July in 1562 in Wittenberg, Germany. He went to school, he did maths, he did geography, he did reading and writing, and his dad gave him a hiding. And then there was a So look, this is not, I'm not interested in that, and so stay on topic, okay? I know you mean well, but please, stay on topic. So, Luther's God, and that of Munzer, and Hut, and of Denk, and of the English revolutionary chaplains, was not the God of pantheism, so they say, blah, 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 but was the transcendent God of Calvin, a God who is in his undecipherable power, does not simply permit, but compels the criminal to act, and then in his matchless righteousness condemns him, though he was helpless to do other than what he did. So Calvin, of course, with his idea of predetermination, says that God basically runs you like a puppet. God guides you. God guides every thought you have and every act that you do. And Luther has stated bluntly, there is nothing that you can think or do that is pleasing to God. Everything you think, every single act that you do is evil. It is disgusting. It is abhorrent in the sight of God. So you can do nothing that is right, nothing that is good. Everything you do, literally everything, is evil. Calvin, of course, took that idea and ran with it, because Calvin was a kid when Luther was nailing the papers, apparently, to the door of a cathedral at Wittenberg. Calvin was 8 years old. So it took him a while to grow up and get stupid. So anyway, so basically then, so God makes you do something bad, then God blames you for it, and then God throws you into hell for doing bad things, although God had decided before you were even born that you were going to do bad things and you were going to hell anyway. So, yeah. So compared to the spiritualized transcendent, anything not of the spirit, meaning anything of the material world, man himself, are inexorably evil, which is the Gnostic view. That is Gnosticism. That is not Christian. That is Gnostic. And therefore, they utilize the Bible as reason. Sorry, there was the quote I had from the particular verse. This one, 1 Corinthians 13:10. So now, because they are justified by faith, in other words, through their imagination, because Jesus talks to them directly in their heads, they're hearing voices in their heads, they are allowed to hate you because you are, we see, they're special, and you are not, because they are Gnostics, and you are evil. And they can condemn you because that's what the left does. Can you see the link from this idea, this ideology, this way of thinking to leftism today? Right. Total depravity, yes. So it's a complicated topic, so yeah. So let me see. Welcome, Dr. Gemmel. Okay, so guys, am I making sense so far? I do understand I might be using a very sarcastic tone towards this, but this stuff makes me angry. Right. So now, even infants. Now let's get back to Voddy Bartram and the viper in a diaper, because babies are evil. Didn't you know that? Because God loves you and babies are evil, and that's the message you need to take away from Christianity, because that's what Calvin teaches. And Calvin listened to God because God spoke to Calvin. Calvin could hear the voices, and you can't, and you're going to hell because reasons. So even infants, they bring their condemnation into the world with them. Infants are rendered subject to the punishment of their own sinfulness because they're born sinful, and they are sinful because they're not innocent. There's no innocent babies because you're evil. You're human. You were born, right? You're evil because that's what we think of babies. Disgusting babies, viper in a diaper. Their whole nature is a seed of sin, and therefore cannot but be odious and abominable to God. Calvin, those are the words of John Calvin. Babies are evil, the nature of babies is sinful, and they cannot but be disgusting and abominable to God. Thanks, Calvin. That's a really positive worldview. I'm glad to hear that. Thanks for sharing. Now, please go sit in the corner and, yeah, don't turn around, don't talk to anyone ever again. So, yeah, that is John Calvin speaking. Yeah, so this is a very dark, very negative, very disgusting, unchristian worldview. So, it's Gnostic. Protestants are astonishingly unaware of Luther. Yes, read Luther's Scat, The Fecal Origins of Protestant by Raymond J. Yeah. I actually have some notes on that topic, which I will get into in the future, but we'll talk about that another time. So, yeah. Okay, guys, am I making sense so far? Do I sound like I am simply inventing things, that I'm just lying, or am I presenting some evidence or am I discussing things that make sense, that seem logical and rational, historically derived, and yeah. At that time, the mainline position was the belief in the limbo of the infants. Okay, so now let's have a look. This is Christian History Institute. Now, this looks like a specious webpage to me. Okay, fine, right. And they're discussing Christian history, issue 39, Martin Luther, the later years. Let's continue. So I'll go up to page 25 on page 14. So I've got 11 pages to do. I've been going for 1 hour, and let me see how far I get. The forgotten years of Martin Luther. Martin Luther, forgotten, the giant of the Protestant Reformation, the man who even in his day was called the angel whom God has sent to mankind. Yeah, Martin Luther, who was called the angel that God sent to mankind. And they say, as one scholar said, the older Martin Luther was, if anything, he was even livelier than the young Martin Luther. Yet we hardly know anything about him. So one biography of Luther that crossed my desk devotes just one chapter out of 14 to the final 23 years of his life. Another biography can muster only 23 pages to those busy years. That's 1 page per year. In other words, for some reason, Protestant historians don't want to talk about Martin Luther's later years. They like to tell you when Martin Luther was 12, he helped a young lady across the road, and then he went back and he helped an old lady across the road, and he carried her groceries. And there was a horse and carriage coming, and he protected her from the horse and carriage, and he took her across the road. So praise be to Martin Luther, such a Christian. And then it's like, yeah, and then after that he said all the Jews should have been killed. We should have murdered all the Jews in Germany, and we should have done that. But let's not talk about that, because that would be divisive in Christianity. We don't want to divide. So yeah. There's also plenty of accounts concerning incredibly violent Buddhist monks. Well, if you look at the Sufis, who are also mystics, they were incredibly violent as well. Sufis were very violent. They loved to kill things too, and they were mystics. So mystics can be extremely violent. Yes. So, okay. Let's just say, those who forsake the church. For he that forsakes the Catholic Church, how is he in Christ, who is not in the members of Christ? How is he in Christ, who is not in the body of Christ? The body meaning the church, the Catholic Church. Those, therefore, take scandal or occasion of falling, who forsake Christ or the church. That is St. Augustine, Homily 1, section 12. Therefore, because you have become members of Christ, I warn you, I fear for you, not so much from the pagans, nor so much from the Jews, nor so much from the heretics, as from the bad Catholics. Choose for yourselves those whom you may imitate among the people of God. For if you wish to imitate the crowd, you will not tread the narrow path in the company of the few. Beware of bad Catholics. Now, St. Augustine bluntly states, if you are not in the Catholic Church, you are outside of the body of Christ. I'll just leave it at that. Make of that what you will. So Luther was a propagandist and a liar. Luther's writing in The Jews and Their Lies is a vehement and intolerant stance towards Jews. To him, they are deceitful, blasphemous, and dangerous. Luther calls for severe measures against Jews. Confiscation of their money, in other words, stealing their money, destroying their property, burning their things, expulsion from Christian land, censorship of their religious writings, destruction of their synagogues. He has extreme prejudice, animosity, and hostility towards the Jewish people. He believed reason and free will were worthless, just like Calvin, because Calvin got it from Luther. Faith alone led to salvation. Just in other words, your imagination alone will lead you to salvation. Contradicting early church belief that faith and good works were both necessary. He rejected numerous books of the Bible like James, Jude, and Revelation because sola scriptura, the Bible is sacred, except these 15 books that I don't like really need to be removed from the Bible because I don't like those books. These books, because the Bible is perfect and holy, it's the Word of God, it's sola scriptura. Except that book is crap, that book is crap, that book is crap. Yeah, that book is crap, that chapter's horrible, take that out. We got to edit a few words here. That verse is wrong, we got to edit that verse because it's okay when Martin Luther does it. And so he rejected numerous books of the Bible, often in insulting ways. Martin Luther spoke very insultingly of the Bible. We'll discuss that. He claimed the Catholic Pope was the Antichrist and the papacy was satanic. They probably didn't kill enough peasants for him, so he felt that he needed to up the peasant killing count for God. So the Catholic Church was the synagogue of Satan because they weren't killing enough peasants, obviously, and they didn't do enough warfare, apparently. Okay. He condemned the peasants who revolted during the Peasants' War in Germany. He referred to them as mad dogs who should have been knocked to pieces. He approved of absolute obedience to political rulers. So take the jab, because otherwise you're going to get COVID-19. Take the jab, right? Obey your rulers. He mocked and insulted his opponents in crude terms. He was known for his vulgar style and ad hominem attacks. Dr. Jonathan Gemmell, you're most welcome. Hopefully you've been listening from the beginning, or caught up with from the beginning. I never read anything about Luther, and I would parrot arguments that he was a hero. So many people today still don't study church history. Yeah, so yeah, look guys, this stuff makes me angry. To know this and read this makes me angry. I didn't learn this in Sunday school. For some reason, I wasn't told. Now, if this is true, then we need to know this so we can make an informed decision. And if this is true, then Martin Luther is a lot like the Muhammad of Germany. So, the superior authority of the Pope. Let's contrast Martin Luther's views with that of early Christians. Your apostolicity, therefore, should show that it deservedly has succeeded to the Apostle Peter, since the Lord will be demanding from you, namely, the chief shepherd, the salvation of all persons who have been able to be saved by strengthened concord. That is the Emperor Justinian I to Saint Pope Hormisdas, okay, in 561. Sorry, document 561 in Roman State and Christian Church, 520 AD. So the Pope explicitly writes, the Justinian the Emperor writes to the Pope, calling the Pope the chief shepherd, the one in charge of the church. Now, letters of various emperors to popes, including Justinian, never view the Pope as equal with all the other bishops. On the contrary, they consistently ask the Pope to exercise his superior authority to settle issues in the church. It is clear from history that the Pope was the one in charge. Justinian calls the Pope the chief shepherd. So, yeah, small point on that. Let's move on. I will now cover the last 7 slides, right? Let's continue. The link does work. For some people, the link does not work. I don't know why, but the link works. Check in the description box for the link to my archive if that doesn't work. But Google, sometimes some people just have a hard time. It's hard to find the truth in that, as most of it has been hidden for so long. So many opportunities to be led astray. Yes, artsy fartsy. So, yeah. Now, the link works. Trust me that for some people, the link just doesn't work for whatever reason, or it works later. So, how many women did Jesus have sex with? Martin Luther knows. Martin Luther will tell you Jesus had sex with 3 women, because who of you learned that in Sunday school? Let's continue. Dr. Luther and Christ the Adulterer. Now, this is from Dr. Martin Luther's Werke, okay? Kritische Gesamtausgabe, the critical collection. Tischreden. And of course, here we were going to learn from Protestants that, Lloyd, that's a weak hadith. You can't be using weak hadiths, because Martin Luther never wrote that himself. And scholars have been publishing this and using this and viewing this as authentically Martin Luther's material, because the Sahih Hadith are not true, as we all know, because the Hadith are all lies written by haters of Muhammad, and the Tischreden, the table talks, were written by, yeah, okay, whatever. That's a little bit, that's Abdulism for Protestants, but I've heard plenty of people. But here it is in the original Latin. This is written, okay, this is written in Latin, and it's not easy to find it translated, but it does exist. I can assure you, if we look in Martin Luther's works here, we will find it in Luther's works. Let me actually go back here. Let me go to books. Let me go to Luther's works. All books. Let me just see. I should go to. I have the full series of Luther's works here. Okay, I've got the full series of Luther's works, in case anyone's curious about that. So, yeah, but this is in Luther's works. Okay, so guys, let's continue. Luther was in agreement with the Albigensians in that Christ fornicated with Mary Magdalene. So, yeah, so Protestants believe, the first Protestant believed that Jesus had sex with 3 women, which we all learned in Sunday school. I'm sure you learned it too. And of course, that's the same thing that well-known heretics, complete blasphemous heretics, also believed. And if Martin Luther believed what blasphemous heretics believed and said it, then I guess it's okay. Luther wrote, Christ committed adultery, first of all, with the woman at the well, about whom St. John tells us, was not everybody about him saying, what has he been doing with her? Secondly, he had sex with Mary Magdalene. And thirdly, adultery, whom he dismissed so lightly. I believe that's the Samaritan woman. Thus, even Christ, who was so righteous, must have been guilty of fornication before he died. Right. I think that's what Luther's Samaritan woman. Now, of course, here you're going to get, he meant it metaphorically. No, he meant it phorically. This is definitely phorical. It is not metaphorical. There is no indication of meta here. There's just Forrical. So this is Dr. Martin Luther's Werke, Kritische Gesamtausgabe, Hermann Borlau Verlag, 1893. Okay, volume 2, number 1472. Written April 7th to May 1st, 1532. If I click on this link here, this should take us to, you can see it, the link to Luther's works online. Okay, and it wants me to open this because that's going to open up this. Right? It should open up that, I'm guessing. So it should take me, there we go. This is in Martin Luther's works, in my Logos Bible study, Martin Luther's works. Christ had to become an adulterer before he died. And of course, since it's all metaphorical, Christ also had to become a thief, a pedophile. Christ had to become a murderer, because it's all metaphorical, right? Christ also had to be a murderer before he died to, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. Good Christianity there. Christ was a murderer. Christ was a pedophile. Christ was an adulterer. So yeah. Anyway, thanks, Martin. Thanks, Martin Luther. So yeah, brought to you by a rapist too. Yes, don't forget, Christ had to become a rapist before he died, because that's how Christ was able to forgive sin, metaphorically. Do you understand the sick theology of Dr. Martinus Luther? Does Luther think, he doesn't provide any detail. Unfortunately, there's just this. He doesn't provide any detail. There's no additional context. This is the context. It's blunt, straight up statements of fact, or just straight up flat assertions. That's it. This is Martin Luther talking about Jesus. Jesus was shagging around, according to Martin Luther, apparently. Now, of course, they'll say, no. Johann Schlagenhaufen just wrote these nasty things. Yeah, it's like Muslims going, well, no. The Sahih Hadith, Bukhari was just writing lies about Muhammad because reasons. So, yeah. So, the one he dismissed is the adulteress, and the Pharisees brought to him. Ah, okay, thank you. Oratex, thank you for correcting that. I appreciate that. Let's just get that up there. So there's a whole cottage industry of defenses written about Martin Luther. Now, you can dismiss one problem. When you have thousands of issues, then maybe there's more of a little than a little problem. Thank you, Oratex, for that. The one he dismissed is the adulteress the Pharisees brought in for judgment. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay, let's continue. So 5 more slides. Luther loved women. This is Günther Scott's Habe ich nicht genug Tumult ausgelöst? Haven't I caused enough tumult? Haven't I caused enough trouble? Haven't I caused enough issues? This is a book by Günther Scott's Martin Luther in Selbstzeugnissen. So Martin Luther about himself. Now, obviously, these are written by apologists for Martin Luther, and therefore there's a certain positive slant, of course. But in the book Habe ich nicht genug Tumult ausgelöst by Günther Scott's, Luther's views on women are explored. Let's have a brief look, just a brief one. Luther's views on women are depicted as influenced by contempt and hatred towards women, because that's the Christian thing to do. Reflecting the attitudes. Now, this book claims that he's quoting Luther and using Luther's works, but of course he tries to put a positive spin in it, right? So the book is in my archive. You can look it up. It's in the archive as well. He considered, and they say here that Luther was reflecting the attitudes of church scholars of his time. Luther was just reflecting the attitudes of the Catholics, because Luther rejected Catholicism because Catholicism was evil. The Pope was satanic. Catholics were Satan worshippers, and Luther was going to do better, Senator. Luther was going to do better because those Catholics are evil. Luther's going to improve on things. Luther's going to fix it, take us back to proper Christianity by hating women the same way the Catholics apparently do. Yes, that's exactly. Thank you. So yeah, the story just makes perfect sense. So he considered women to be inferior beings, echoing the beliefs of church fathers such as Ambrosius, Augustinus, Thomas from Aquin. Let's just say this is all very questionable history, okay? Let's just say it's more like apologetics that's not necessarily 100% historically accurate. But you see, Martin Luther was better than the Catholics, those evil, satanic, pagan Catholics. Martin Luther was better than them, and Martin Luther had the same ugly beliefs as those disgusting Catholics, because Martin Luther was better than the Catholics. Do you see that the word for this, and this is a technical word you have to go to college to learn, but basically this person is writing a bunch of bullshit. So hopefully that clarifies. And these Catholics viewed women as lesser creatures not made in the image of God. And so therefore Luther viewed women as lesser creatures not made in the image of God. Thanks, Luther. We appreciate it. Your Christianity is, gosh, I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't come along. Would have been dealing with nasty views of women. Catholics hate women by worshipping Mary. ORATEX, look, don't confuse people with the facts here. That's very important. So wasn't Luther supposed to be better? Exactly. So yeah, I don't know. I'm having trouble reading here. To the oblist, thank you very much. I am so grateful. Thank you. God bless you, sir. Thanks for all that you do. I am really grateful for that. Thank you very much. Thank you for the donation. Let's continue. Luther also held the belief that women were inferior. Maybe women are worth half of men? Where have we heard that before, that women are inferior? Women are most of the denizens of hell, or most of the inhabitants. Hang on, there's a guy called, name starts with an M, I can never remember. Started a religion, starts with an I can, Pislam. Yeah, Pislam. Yes, you're right. There's a guy called Muhammad Pislam. Had similar views of women. Definitely nothing to do with Islam. Sorry, you're right. Definitely not Islam. Thanks, Artsy Fartsy, for fixing that. He humorously, and seriously, yeah, he was making a joke, but deadly serious joke, commented on the physical difference between men and women, suggesting that women have more excretions but less wisdom. Women have more excretions but less wisdom. Okay, thanks, Luther. He also emphasized the traditional roles of women in childbirth, motherhood, and household duties. Okay, at least he's... If you write one time out of 1,000, I guess it's okay. It's good odds. The title of the book, Habe ich nicht genug Tumult ausgelöst, by Günther Scholz, references a phrase attributed to Martin Luther, translated as, have I not caused enough uproar? The title alludes to Luther's significant role in sparking controversies and disturbances during the Reformation era. But look, you guys all needed to know that women excrete more but are dumber than men. We all needed to learn this. Women excrete more but are dumber than men. Martin Luther said that. So he also started the Protestant religion, so he can't be wrong because the Catholics are wrong. Martin Luther's right. Let's continue. Luder. Let's look at the name Luder. So Martin Luther's name is originally Luder. Now, this is from a friend of the channel called the linguist, who's a very skilled linguist, right? And so he gave me some information, and I've added additional information. So thank you for providing this information. Luthlims, very good. Yeah, these are. Thank you for that term. Yeah, Luthlims. yeah, kind of appropriate. Luthlims. Yeah, thank you. Good point. Good point you make there, Kush. Yeah, he did not hate women. He emphasized their roles. Erwin Schouten says he feels smarter now. Yeah, you're smarter than women because women excrete more. Dude, I don't even ask me. Let's just move on. I need to get these images out of my head. German, so Luder. So the original name for Martin Luther is Martinus Luder. Luder in German means bait. To bait something, to catch something with bait, to bait it. It means poor, stupid, or sexually immoral woman. In Danish, it's a sexually immoral woman. In Norwegian, a sexually immoral woman. Luder in Dutch and Frisian is evil, a bad person, an evil or bad person. In Dutch, it means bait, or person of an immoral character, a scoundrel, a scumbag, a thief, or a sexually immoral woman. In Afrikaans, a sexual, immoral woman. The word is derived from the same root as to load in West Germanic. Its earliest attestation refers to bait used in falconry to lure the falcon back. But it's to bring back something, to lure it, to catch it. I do not know when it became a family name in German, so I can't exactly determine what it meant at that time, but in all likelihood it had a negative connotation like thief or pauper. So maybe that's why he hates women. He probably got made fun of a lot for his name. That may well be the case. Did some of these claims Luther made track along the timeline of his own experiences, like Aisha lamented about Momo? I don't know. I didn't look into all this deeply, but I'm presenting a bunch of evidence, and it's just like, make of it what you will. Now, of course, we have the Latin delude, luder, delude, Latin deludere, to play false, to mock, to deceive, originally meant simply to deceive the mind or judgment, to cause that which is false to be accepted as true. Okay, let's continue. Lure. Now let's go to Etim Online, the online etymology dictionary. Okay, this is the online etymology dictionary. Luder, lure, right? German, luder, to lure, deceit, bait, so to deceive. Old English, Lapian, to call, to invite. German, laden, to invite or to summon. Okay, great stuff. Let's have a look at dawa. Dawa literally means issuing a summons. Hold on. German, laden, to invite, to summon. Dawa, to issue a summons, make an invitation. To invite, to call someone, to invite them, to invite, to summon. Making an invitation, grammatically the word represents a gerund of a verb with a triconsonantal root meaning to summon or to invite. Luther's name literally translates to dawa. You tell me. Now, someone wrote in the chat today, when I posted this as a community post, they said, you're making, these mathematical connections and you're making code-based connections. I'm like, I don't recall doing that. All I'm showing is Luther's name means to lure, to deceive, to delude, and it means exactly the same thing as dawa. Is there anything to that? Hey, I don't know. Don't ask me. I'm just giving you this information. But what do you think as an audience? Sorry, seriously, as an audience, what do you make of this? Is this just coincidence? Is it just got nothing to do with Islam? It's got nothing to do with Luther. It's just a unhappy accident, right? What do I make of this? Or if the shoe fits, yes, Daniel Rodriguez, or is Luther trying to tell us something? Are people trying to tell us something? I mean, seriously, well, what if Martin Luther's name was Satano-pedophile? Martin Satano-pedophile, or Martin Satan, or Martin pedophile. What if that was his name? Are we supposed to go, well, it's just a coincidence that Martin Luther was named Martin Satan? It's got this really, really not... Yeah. What do I make of this? The man's name translates to dawa. It's exactly the same as dawa, with the idea of to bait, to lure, to deceive people. Yeah, God does have a sense of humor, it seems. Yeah, so let's continue. It's symbolic. I don't believe in coincidence, says Artsy Fartsy. The parallels are not comforting. Yes, Neil D, the parallels are not comforting. Okay, let's do the last couple of slides. Christ the adulterer. What are the implications of Martin Luther claiming that Christ is an adulterer, that Jesus was sleeping around? This quote from Martin Luther, as recorded, implies very troubling logical issues with the rest of his theology. So let's look at his theology. Names have power in the Bible, says Only Love. Yes. It shows that Luther was willing to make very extreme claims, even blasphemous ones, that had no basis in scripture or Christian theology. Right? This calls into question his judgment and the reliability of other theological claims that Martin Luther makes. If he's willing to say Jesus was sleeping around, then was he saying other things that we haven't quite cottoned onto that maybe are not Christian? It contradicts Luther's own theology, which emphasized supposedly Christ's sinlessness and salvation through faith in Christ. To call Christ an adulterer is to deny Jesus' sinless divinity, which is utterly incompatible with supposedly core Lutheran teachings. But maybe, just like we have in the Quran, you have contradictory statements. You have these statements that Muhammad said one thing during one phase, and he said one thing during another phase. It looks like we have exactly the same thing going on with Martin Luther. He would say two different things. Which one is the final one? Which one abrogates which one? Understand? Are we dealing with a series of abrogations just like Muhammad had with Martin Luther? Luther was prone to rhetorical excess and bombast, even on the most serious theological matters. His language seems aimed more at provocation than accuracy or truth. This bombastic style casts doubt on the precision and nuance of his other writings. It reveals potential logical inconsistency and a lack of systematic thinking. And I have discussed, and I will discuss, Martin Luther's lack of systematic theology. Okay, because I have discussed scholars writing about that Martin Luther will drive you nuts because there is nothing consistent about his theology, and his contradictions are just insane. So for him to assert something so blatantly unbiblical shows that his theology was prone to internal contradictions and not logical coherence. It raises questions about Luther's exegetical skills if he could so blatantly misread and misinterpret the biblical text he cited. His interpretive abilities and thus his theology are called into question. Now, this isn't the only crazy quote he makes. We're going to be getting into a bunch of that as well. I mean, we'll talk about the other weird things he says. This raises doubts about his judgment, precision, and biblical exegesis. His other writings and ideas have to be reevaluated in light of these concerns. But taking the quote at face value, it is very problematic. Yes, he rejected scholastic logic. He did reject logic. He was utterly, and I know someone's going to make some dumb statement in the comment, Lord, you're lying, and Luther loved logic. Bullshit. Bullshit. We'll discuss that at length. I've discussed it already. I've got whole episodes on it discussing Luther's view of logic as satanic. So, yeah. Christ the Adulterer, implications too. Can you understand why I get so upset? I get really angry at this stuff. This man upsets me when I read through this stuff. This calls Luther's judgment and mental stability into question, at least at that point in time. To make such an outrageous claim, even in a casual context, raises concerns about his reasoning and good judgment. Luther was willing to say things for rhetorical effect, for propagandistic effect, that he knew or should have known were untrue and problematic. This damages his credibility and suggests other extreme claims of his may have been rhetorical rather than accurately reflecting his views. So, it proves Luther's theology fell prey to internal contradictions, logical inconsistencies, and a lack of systematic coherence. His thinking seems episodic and rhetorical, not logical. It shows Luther's exegesis of Scripture could be grossly flawed, calling into question his interpretive abilities. If he could so badly misread those biblical passages about Christ, his exegesis of other texts of the Bible must be regarded with criticism. It proves Luther's enthusiasm outpaced his judgment. His desire to provoke and inspire led him to make claims that undermine his own cause and message. His extremes are shown to be liabilities, not strengths. So this calls into question the mental instability of a lot of Lutherans' hearers too. Goes to show how easy it is to manipulate people. Yep. Yes, Luther did call logic a whore and the servant of Satan, and he called reason satanic, basically. So Luther loved whores, Luther loved logic. We'll discuss, don't worry, we're getting to Luther and all of that stuff. So, one quote doesn't necessarily disprove all of Luther's theology. Okay, one bad quote, but I think we've been going through a number of bad things, so now his whole theology looks a little wacky because it's not just one bad quote. Right, but one quote alone does not disprove all of Luther's theology or accomplishments. It does expose some very troubling weaknesses, logical issues, and character flaws that more balanced historians and theologians should not ignore. Yes, we are seeing a pattern. And of course, these balanced theologians and historians have been ignoring exactly this evidence because it makes Luther and the Protestant movement look very, very bad. Luther's rhetoric seems to have gotten the better of him with problematic results, so it requires us to read Luther with more discernment, recognizing the logical, moral, and rhetorical problems that compromised his judgment and undercut his message. So yeah, that's okay. Let's go on to the last two slides. Or I finish on this slide. Let me just have a quick look if I finish here. So hold on. No, this is the last slide for today. I hope you guys are having fun. Oh no, up to slide 25. So we have the next slide is the last slide after this one. So let's talk about the Gnostic Jesus and his lover Mary. The Cathars or Albigensians were a 12th and 13th century Christian sect, or a heretical sect that claimed they were Christians, put it that way, a pseudo-biblical sect, but they were definitely Manichaean Gnostics. It was considered heretical by the Catholic Church. They believed in dualism, which is Gnostic, viewing the material world as evil, which Calvin and Luther did, and the spiritual world as good. Sounds familiar. They also held unorthodox views about Jesus and Mary Magdalene, considering them to be the ancestors of a royal lineage. Basically, these guys were the main characters, the main Gnostics in Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. So the Da Vinci Code is based on their heretical theories. These beliefs were part of the Cathar faith and were intertwined with their rejection of the material world and their emphasis on the sacred feminine. Unorthodox views and practices, including the veneration of Mary Magdalene, were among the reasons for their condemnation as heretics by the Catholic Church. According to their beliefs, the physical Jesus from the material world would have been evil, a false Messiah, and a lustful lover of the material Mary Magdalene. These beliefs were intertwined with their rejection of the material world and their emphasis on the sacred feminine. Okay, I think I already said that, so I repeated one line. So understand, this was a Gnostic heretical belief about Jesus. It's in the Da Vinci Code. And Martin Luther actually wrote the same thing. Martin Luther said the same thing. So either Dan Brown is a great Christian and we really should listen to his theology because then it's the gospel according to Dan Brown is correct, or we have a problem here, right? So let's have a look at the final slide for today. And I'll pick up on the next talk from this slide. Radical or scriptural? So this is from a paper by Lyndall Roper, as I recall. And this is a figure of Lucas Cranach the Younger, Martin Luther, and Philip Melanchthon. Okay, so this is by the painter Lucas Cranach the Younger, Martin Luther, and Philip Melanchthon, reproduced by permission of the North Carolina Museum of Art. And they speak, this is about the body, Martin Luther, the body, okay? And they say here, in some of his very last letters to his wife, Martin Luther described his inability to be sexually aroused by the sight of prostitutes, and he blamed Jews for his illness. So, hold on. If you guys get any value of the things that I say here, despite the, despite my sarcastic and mocking tone, because I think sometimes I want to laugh because I don't want to cry. If you get any value, please do like, do share, do subscribe, all those wonderful YouTube things. Tell your friends about it. This is not fun stuff. This is not pleasant stuff. These are uncomfortable truths, but I think they need to be spoken. I don't make friends by saying these things. I'm definitely not making myself popular by saying things that cause divisiveness in Christianity, because, the truth is divisive. We must not speak the truth in Christianity because Protestants don't like it, because the truth can hurt their feelings. So we must not speak the truth. Jesus doesn't want that. So now, very interesting. So radical or scriptural? So Luther is hypocritical. He attacks the Catholic Church for supposed heresies and false teachings, while Martin Luther promotes outrageously false teachings himself. How much did Luther's personal prejudices, his speculations, his inner demons, his mental unwellness influence his theology rather than an actual faithfulness to the Bible? Ask yourself those questions based on what we have discussed up to now. And so basically what this says here is, I'll read this again. He wrote to his friend Georg Spalatin during his stay at the Wartburg, by turns asking him for laxatives and entrusting him with his manuscripts. And in some of his very last letters to his wife, he writes to his wife, he described his inability to be sexually aroused by the sight of prostitutes, and he blamed Jews for his illness. Yes. That's in a paper by, I believe, Lyndall Roper. So I have the original paper somewhere. It's in my notes. I can find it. So, so this is Martin Luther. Hey, honey. I'm at the Wartburg here, and you know what? I'm not getting sexually aroused by the sight of prostitutes. I'm like, and I think it's the Jews that did it. The Jews are responsible. They caused it for sure. Yeah, those Jews. Jeez, I'm not getting turned on by these. Yeah, she's right here. The prostitute's right here. I'm looking at her and I'm not getting it. Yeah, it's not happening for me. So anyway, this is Martin signing off. Love you, honey. Bye. So that's Martin Luther. So guys, thank you for your time. That's 25 slides. And hopefully you've learned something and gained something from this. Okay. Hopefully we've started to move towards a very uncomfortable and very dirty truth. But it's the Jewish anti-party. It's the Jewish magic. Yeah, because now one thing I have to mention, the reason I have this in green, he blamed the Jews for his illness. Muhammad also blamed the Jews for bewitching him. Muhammad also blamed the Jews for bewitching him and making him unable to spend quality time with his wives. That Muhammad did. Martin Luther is kind of paralleling that same concept. Now, there's a little bit too much Islam going on here with Martin Luther, or Muhammad Luther. So we started off, I did mention this quote, when the truth is replaced by silence, the silence is a lie. So I hope that I am presenting factually accurate history, things that are credible, things that are often Martin Luther's own words, or the words of credible historians who are known for their credibility, who are posting from sources that I do not have access to. So I'm quoting them because I personally don't have access to the academic sources that they have access to. So hopefully you've learned something, and the Protestant movement is not what we've been told it is. The stories we've been told about the Catholic Church, when I get to the Inquisition one day, we'll learn that that story is mostly false. There's some truths and there's a lot of lies. And but the same topic, we have a lot of lies about Protestantism and a lot of lies by Protestants and a lot of lies about the Catholic Church by Protestants. Protestants who made war, who love to make war, murder, and lies. So what was the question by Francis Boole that I answered? Let me just double check. Let me just check any last comments. Didn't the Crusades genocide the Cathars? No, I don't know enough about that. I didn't look deeply into that yet. Where's the question by Francis Boole? If I can't see anything. Yeah, so hold on. What did I miss? Lloyd has answered your question, you said, so I'm trying to find what it is that he might have said that I could have missed. Yeah, drop it in the chat later, I'll have a look. I can't catch every comment. Oh, how much did Luther learn from Islam? I think he learned a little too much from Islam. Did he have children? Yeah, plenty of kids. He had like 6 kids. Yeah, like 6 kids, yeah. So guys, yeah, so am I just lying? Am I just making things up? Am I just inventing facts? Am I fabricating out of whole cloth? Or am I presenting what seems like a coherent, rational, logical, well-researched historical story that fills in gaps that we did not know, gives us information we didn't have before? But there's the problem with Protestantism. There is something very rotten, and Martin Luther has some serious feet of clay. So guys, yeah, so understand why I have my severe doubts about the Protestant Church. And while the Catholic Church as a human institution has its issues, we do need to understand that it is historical and its doctrine is something that we can trace back for a long way. And the church is under assault. The Catholic Church might be under assault, and you can say that, but there's falsehood that may have entered the Catholic Church, and we can point that out. But the Protestant religion seems to be founded on a false Messiah, on an evil man, and it is based on heresies, blasphemies, and on a false foundation from its inception. So guys, thank you very much. That's part 1 of my talk on Luther. I've got 100 slides so far. There may be more. I've got exactly 100 slides in this one right now, but I will also be branching off into other papers, other discussions connected to this. So nothing to do with Protestantism, Lloyd, like nothing to do with Islam. Yes, so guys, thank you very much. Share this with people. Tell people about it. It's uncomfortable, but I believe it's the truth. And remember, when the truth is replaced by silence, the silence is a lie. We cannot be silent. If we have the facts, you cannot go back into the darkness once you have seen the light. Understand that. So guys, I'll leave it at that. Hopefully, so I appreciate it, and thank you again for all your support. Thanks for the chat. Thanks for the engagement. Thank you for the financial support for those of you who have. I could not have done this without you. You guys provided a lot of information. I get a great deal of information from the audience who teach me things as well. So thank you guys very much. I must go, but God bless, guys, and see you soon. Take care.